The storm outside was loud, shaking the old outpost walls like thin paper. Cold wind howled through broken panels, and the ground trembled every few minutes as thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, it was quiet, but not peaceful. Sergeant Mason checked the last room of the crashed alien cargo ship. His boots crunched over broken glass and metal scraps. The place had been raided, burned, and forgotten. Just another wreck on this cold, empty moon. He held his flashlight steady, moving slowly, his breath white in the freezing air. The ship's lights were dead, and his helmet visor showed flickers of static. Then he heard it, a soft sound, a whimper. It came again, like someone trying not to cry, high-pitched, shaky, and scared. Mason stopped moving. He turned off the flashlight and listened carefully. Breathing slow, his hand moved to his sidearm, but he didn't pull it out yet. The sound was coming from behind a tall stack of metal crates, the back of the cargo bay, dark and tight. A place no soldier would crawl into without a reason. But someone was in there. "Hello," he said gently, not too loud. "I'm not here to hurt you." No answer, just another quiet cry. He took a step forward. A crate moved just a little, and something small dashed between the shadows. It was fast. So fast he barely saw it, but his visor caught enough a flash of pale purple skin. Large eyes and tiny feet. A child, or something close. Mason dropped to one knee and slowly took off his helmet. He placed it beside him and pulled out a protein bar from his pack. He opened it and laid it on the ground, then slid it forward. "I don't know who you are," he said softly, "but you sound scared. This is food. You can have it. I won't come closer." Silence. Then, a rustle. A face peeked out from behind a crate. Her skin was smooth and purple, eyes huge and glowing faintly. Her cheeks were marked with old dirt, and her thin arms hugged her knees tight. She looked terrified, like he was a monster. She hissed at him, showing small, sharp teeth. Her voice shook, as she said something in a language he didn't understand. But the meaning was clear. "Stay away. I won't touch you," Mason said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you." The alien girl stared at him, unmoving. Her eyes kept jumping from the protein bar to his face. And back. She didn't trust him. He couldn't blame her. Mason stood slowly, kept his hands up, and backed away. He turned and walked out of the cargo bay, leaving the door slightly open. She didn't come after him, but the bar was gone when he checked back an hour later. That night, Mason stayed at the nearby outpost. It had power, heat, and 2 working rooms, enough for 1 soldier and, maybe a guest. He left more food at the cargo bay each morning, and every morning it disappeared. He talked, sometimes, even if she didn't answer. He told her his name, where he came from, how Earth smelled like rain and metal, and how he missed real coffee. He never pushed, never tried to grab her, never followed her into the shadows. Then, on the 5th day, she made a sound behind him. He turned slowly and saw her crouched by the food bag. She didn't run this time, just stared. He didn't move. She pointed at his knife, trembling. He understood, carefully. Mason unstrapped it and placed it on the floor. Then he stepped back again. She didn't smile, but she didn't hiss either. She picked up the food and walked backward into the darkness. He stood there a long time, watching the shadows, wondering how a girl that small had survived alone in that wreck on a frozen moon full of predators and storms. That night, he left a thermal blanket with the food. It was gone the next morning, and a tiny set of footprints led toward the outpost door before turning back. She was getting closer, but she still didn't trust him, and deep inside, Mason knew why. Somewhere, somehow, someone had told her that humans were monsters, and tonight, as he heard another distant cry in the wind, he made a silent promise he would show her they were wrong. Mason sat by the outpost window, sipping a cup of weak, lukewarm tea. His eyes kept flicking toward the monitor that showed a live feed from the cargo bay's entrance. Nothing moved, but he had a feeling, a strong one, that she was close. He hadn't seen her face properly again, not since the first time. But every morning, something changed. The food vanished faster. The footprints came a little closer. And once, he even found a small rock toy near the bag, something carefully carved with claws. He knew what it meant. She was watching him, testing him. Thinking, but she still feared him. Mason didn't know much about her species. He only recognized the general features: slim body, delicate bones, large, expressive eyes. They were from a planet called Lafari Prime, a quiet place now burned to ash in the last war. Most of the survivors had been taken as slaves or vanished during the smuggler raids. He wondered how many stories she had been told. What had she seen? What had the smugglers done? And then, a thought struck him. What if she thought he was going to eat her? He almost laughed. But then he remembered the terror in her eyes. She hadn't looked afraid of getting hit or trapped. She looked like prey, cornered by a predator. It made his stomach twist. Outside, the sky darkened as another storm rolled in. Wind slammed against the walls like a hammer. Ice dust flew through broken vents, and still. The monitor blinked quietly in the background. Mason stood up, walked over to the heater, and grabbed another thermal blanket. This one was smaller. It had cartoon rockets printed on it, left over from a supply drop meant for refugee kids. He folded it neatly and stuffed it in a plastic bag with a protein bar, water packet, and a small hand-warming gel pad. Then he walked back to the ship. Inside, it was silent, but not empty. The air felt watched. He walked slowly, placed the bag on the same spot, then turned around to leave, but paused. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice echoing softly through the metal walls. "You don't have to come out, but I want you to know something. I'm not a monster." No reply, just the wind howling beyond the broken hull. He walked out, boots crunching over metal pieces, and didn't look back. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, those glowing eyes, the dirt-streaked cheeks, the look of pure fear. He turned on the heater higher, tossed off the blanket, then pulled it back on 5 minutes later. The room felt too small, too quiet, just after midnight. He heard the sound. It was faint, soft, like metal being gently scratched. He sat up fast, reached for his blaster, then froze. On the floor near the door was a small blue blanket, not the one he had given. This was different, told her, torn, something she had carried with her. Folded on top was a rock, shaped like a star, and resting beside it, a single protein bar, untouched. His heart jumped. It wasn't fear anymore. It was trust. She was returning his gift, offering her own, like an apology, or maybe a test. He didn't move it. Not yet. He just stared at it, not wanting to break the moment. Then he saw her, barely visible in the shadow near the hallway. Crouched low, hands pressed against the wall. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Watching him, she didn't speak, didn't run, just stared. He didn't say a word. He didn't want to scare her away. Instead, he sat back down slowly on the floor. Not far from the gift she left, and leaned against the wall. He placed his blaster aside, removed his boots, and sat with both hands open. A full minute passed. Then she moved. One tiny step, then another. Her claws clicked softly against the floor. She didn't come close, but she didn't run either. Mason kept his breathing calm, his heart beat steady. He wanted to reach out, to say something kind, but he stayed quiet. She bent down, picked up the protein bar she had brought, placed it on his side of the room. Then she vanished into the shadows again. Mason let out a slow breath, his hands still open, his eyes wide. That night, for the first time, he slept deeply. And when morning came, the bar was still there, untouched, but on top of it sat something new. A single feather, pale blue, glowing faintly in the light. She was terrified of him, but something inside her had changed, and he knew now this wasn't just about food or shelter. This was about something deeper, something broken, something that maybe he could help heal. It happened just before dawn. A loud screech tore through the frozen air. Sharp like metal ripping in half, Mason jerked awake, grabbing his blaster, heart pounding. The alarm on his wrist blinked red movement detected near the landing bay. He pulled on his boots, slipped on his jacket, and ran into the cold hallway. His breath steamed in the air as he reached the outer door. Ice crystals had begun forming on the walls from the dropping temperature. But that wasn't what bothered him. The door was wide open. He hadn't left it that way. He raised his weapon slowly, scanning the darkness outside. Then he saw deep claw marks across the ice. Wide footprints, too big to belong to any human, and too fresh. Something large had broken in during the night, and it was still nearby. Mason tapped his visor, switching to thermal mode. Red heat signatures glowed in the distance, two of them. One was his, the other smaller, hiding behind a storage crate not far from the edge of the landing strip. His gut turned cold. It was her. She had come too close to the outpost. Maybe curious, maybe brave, but now she wasn't alone. The second heat signature moved fast, growling low, sniffing the air. It was a wild scavenger beast. Native to this moon, huge and hungry, drawn by the scent of food or fear. Mason didn't think. He sprinted, snow crunched under his boots, the wind cutting his face like knives. The beast turned its head, eyes glowing yellow in the dark. Its mouth opened wide, steam rolling from its jaws as it roared and charged. Mason. Dove sliding across the ice, he aimed and fired, the blaster bolt slicing into the beast's shoulder. It howled in pain, crashing sideways into a broken storage pod. But it wasn't done yet. He landed near the crate, rolled, and scooped the small alien girl into his arms without thinking. She screamed, her body stiff and trembling. Claws digging into his chest plate. "Hold on," he shouted as he ran. The beast charged again, bounding over the wreckage. Mason's legs pushed hard. Lungs burning, he jumped into the outpost door and slammed it shut just as the beast slammed into it from outside, metal creaking and groaning. From the impact, he dropped to the floor, panting, the girl still in his arms. She didn't move. She was frozen stiff. Face buried in his chest, her whole body shook with tiny shivers, and her claws were still digging into his armor. But softer now. Mason didn't speak. He just held her there for a moment. Feeling her heart race against his chest, he had no idea what language she spoke, but some things didn't need words. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes were wide and full of fear. But there was something else this time: confusion. She had seen him fight, risk his life, carry her through danger, and he hadn't tried to eat her. He hadn't hurt her. He had protected her. Mason gently set her down on a padded bench near the heater. She curled up into a small ball, still silent, watching him with those glowing eyes. He removed his armor chest plate where her claws had scratched the surface, not deep but enough to leave marks. He didn't care. He sat across from her, arms resting on his knees, breathing steady. "I didn't want to scare you," he said softly, "but I had to get you out of there. That thing would have killed you." She didn't reply, but she didn't run. Instead, she reached into her side pouch, something made from old cloth, and slowly pulled out a small white pebble. She rolled it across the bench toward him. He caught it without looking down, eyes still on her face. A gift. He nodded once, then placed the pebble on the table beside him, not pocketing it, showing her it mattered. In the hours that followed, she didn't leave the room. She sat by the heater, quiet, blinking slowly, her body relaxing little by little. When the storm passed, she finally stood, walked over to Mason and touched his boot. Just once. Then she walked back to her corner and sat down again. That single touch said everything. He wasn't the monster she thought he was, and for the first time since they met. Mason knew the wall between them had cracked. Not broken yet, but cracked enough for something new to grow. Mason didn't see her for 2 full days, not in the hallway, not near the heater. Not even on the camera feeds. He quietly kept running from the supply room. The pebble she had given him still sat untouched on the side table, its surface smooth and white. He didn't move it. He didn't dare. The storm had passed, but the silence inside the outpost now felt heavier, colder, like something delicate had been scared away again. He tried not to worry, tried to believe she was just hiding, resting, watching from the shadows like before, but something inside him didn't feel right. He went back to the cargo ship wreck, left food, like always, even placed a fresh blanket with the cartoon rockets in the corner, untouched from the first gift she had never used. He waited. She didn't come that night. As the wind howled low like a wounded animal, Mason sat on the cold metal floor near the outpost door, staring at the pebble, his hand resting beside it. She probably thinks I broke her trust, he whispered to himself. Maybe I held her too tight. Maybe I ran too fast. The silence answered him. And then, just before midnight, something small moved near the vent by the heater. He didn't turn, he didn't speak, he just listened. Light feet tapped gently against the floor, a quiet scraping sound, like claws sliding over soft cloth. Then, a pause, long and heavy. Finally, she stepped into view. She wasn't wearing the old cloth wrap anymore. Instead, she had wrapped the small cartoon blanket around her shoulders. It looked massive on her tiny frame, almost dragging across the floor. In her hands, she held something shiny as data. Pat, the one he thought he had lost 2 weeks ago. She walked to him slowly, eyes not afraid now, but curious, and extended the pad toward him without a word. Mason took it gently, smiled, and said, "Thank you." She didn't smile back, but her eyes didn't flinch. That was enough. He placed the pad down and tapped it on. The screen flickered to life. Still working, still cracked in the corner, she jumped slightly at the light. Then leaned in, interested, watching every movement. He opened a photo. It was an old picture of Earth, his backyard. A small garden full of green trees. The sky was blue and clear. And a dog lay sleeping on the porch. She stared at it like it was a dream. He opened more pictures, his squad, his ship, a blurry image of stars from orbit, and then one with him, standing beside 2 kids from a refugee camp, smiling awkwardly, holding toys in their hands. She pointed to them. They were scared too, Mason said, but not of me. Scared of the war, of the noise. They didn't speak much either. Just like you. She looked up at him. Then down at her claws. With a slow breath, she touched the screen and pressed a button by accident. The photo changed to a short video. It played quietly. Mason's voice from weeks ago, saying something dumb to the camera while fixing the ship engine. The video shaky and full of static. She giggled. It was the first sound she made that wasn't a hiss or a cry. Mason turned toward her, shocked, and saw at her face. Soft now, her small lips curled into the tiniest smile. "Your name," he said softly. "Do you have one? Can you tell me?" She looked nervous for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Nari," she whispered. It came out shaky, like wind slipping through broken glass, but it was clear. "Nari," Mason repeated, nodding. "That's a good name." She blinked, then touched his chest, right above his heart plate. "My son," she said, uncertain. He laughed gently. Close enough. The next hour passed quietly. Just the 2 of them sitting near the heater, looking at pictures and listening to short voice clips from the past. Some made her giggle again. Others made her tilt her head like she was learning every word. Before she fell asleep, curled up in the blanket, she reached out with one tiny claw and touched the smooth pebble on the table. Then she slid it back to him, her eyes half closed. Mason watched her breathe, slow and steady, her fears melting like frost in the sun. She didn't just see a human anymore, she saw someone safe, someone who listened, someone who didn't want anything from her except her name, and now she had given it. The sun never truly rose on this moon, but the sky above the outpost grew a little less dark, washed in pale orange light from the nearest gas giant. Mason stood by the window, sipping recycled water from a metal cup, watching the snow drift lazily outside. Behind him, small feet shuffled across the floor. Light like falling dust, Nari was awake. She walked out from the supply room, wrapped in the same cartoon blanket, now dragging on the floor behind her like a cape. Her big, glowing eyes scanned the room. And she paused when she saw him by the window. Mason turned and gave a small wave. "Morning," he said gently. Nari blinked, then raised her little hand and tried to copy the motion. Her fingers spread awkwardly, but she got the shape close enough. That single moment nearly made Mason choke on his drink. She had never done that before. Not once had she copied a gesture. He knelt down and opened the emergency crate near the heater. Inside were leftover items from a children's refugee drop basic. Food packs, light tools, and a small glowing device shaped like a ball. He held it up. Nari tilted her head, curious. Her blanket dragged behind her as she walked closer. Her claws clicked softly on the metal floor. Mason pressed the ball's center, and it lit up in soft colors. Blue, green, red, yellow, then began floating midair, slowly spinning. Her eyes widened. She reached for it, touched it, and pulled her hand back as it twirled in place, her mouth half open in surprise. "It's called a learning orb," Mason said. "Helps kids practice words and touch commands." She looked at him, then back at the orb, then tapped it twice. A soft voice came from the device. "Apple." The word meant nothing to her. Mason could see it on her face, so he knelt beside her, opened a hollow photo from his pad, and showed her an image of a red apple from Earth. "That," he pointed, "apple." She stared at it, then at the orb, and repeated softly, "Ape." "Pool," Mason smiled. "Perfect." She blinked slowly, then looked down at her claws, gripping the sides of the blanket. "Eat." He paused. "Yes. It's food, but I don't have one here. Maybe later," Nari nodded, trying to lock the idea. In her mind, she tapped the orb again. "Dog," the orb said. Mason smiled again and brought up the photo of his old dog. Cooper from Earthbig, fluffy, a dopey tongue hanging out of his mouth. She stared, wide-eyed. "Mon." "Stir?" she asked. He laughed. No, not a monster. He was my friend. He barked a lot, but he was sweet." She looked uncertain, but not afraid. That entire morning they sat together by the heater, the learning orb floating between them. Mason guiding her slowly through words, matching them to photos, teaching her simple ones like sky. Hand, cold, and safe. She loved that last one. When he said it safe, she looked at him differently, like something clicked deep inside her. Later that day, the outpost lights flickered. Power drop. Mason sighed, stood up, and walked to the rear generator hatch. "I'll be back," he told her. "Stay near the heater," but she followed him, quiet as a shadow. He opened the floor panel, began adjusting the old fusion link, and heard her settle down nearby. Watching his hands carefully, he smiled without looking. "You curious?" Nari didn't answer, but a moment later, she scooted closer and pointed at a tool wrong one. He gently turned her hand toward the right one. "This one, see the shape." She nodded. He fixed the link while she handed him tools one by one, her claws tapping gently against the metal handles. When the power surged back to life, the hallway lights blinked on. The outpost hummed softly again, and Neri clapped her hands, letting out a small, surprised laugh. It wasn't just a sound, it was joy. She was beginning to feel something she hadn't in a long time useful. She helped again that evening when Mason prepared the meal packs. He let her peel the thermal seals, pour water into the heating trays, and even stir the small spoon that glowed faintly as the food warmed up. She didn't eat fast like before, like an animal fighting for scraps. She ate slow now, calm, seated beside him with her blanket still wrapped around her like armor. And when she was done, she reached out. Her small hand touched his wrist, light as a whisper, and she said, "You not monster?" Mason didn't speak. His throat tightened. He just nodded, holding her gaze, because in that moment, no words could carry the weight of what she had just given him. She didn't fear him anymore. She trusted him, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that not all humans were monsters after all. Snow fell sideways outside the outpost, fast and heavy, like white ash blowing through the dying wind. Inside, the lights were dim, backup power humming low. Mason stood by the comm station, tapping at controls that refused to respond. The long-range transmitter was still offline. He sighed and looked. Back at the main room, Nari was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her small hands working on a toy made of scrap parts of floating orb she had half repaired using spare wiring and pieces of an old lamp. Her face was calm, focused, her tongue poking from the side of her mouth as she twisted wires with careful claws. Mason smiled. She was changing fast, learning, building, thinking, but the calm didn't last. At exactly 1842 hours, the motion sensor near the ridge flashed red. Mason turned quickly, eyes narrowing at the screen. It showed 4 signals approaching. The outposts, fast, armed, not human military tags. Raiders, he cursed under his breath, grabbed his blaster and pulled on his chest plate. His voice stayed steady, but his words were sharp. "Nari, come here. Now?" She looked up, surprised by his tone, but obeyed without hesitation. Mason took her by the hand and moved to the hidden panel in the wall behind the food shelf. He opened it and revealed a crawl space just big enough for her tiny body. "Hide," he said firmly. "Stay quiet. No matter what happens, don't come out unless I say so. Understand?" Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the dim light. "But you," she whispered. "I'll be fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just stay hidden." She hesitated, then nodded once, climbed inside, and pulled the panel closed from the inside. Mason turned back to the main door. Breathing slowly, he had faced worse than raiders before. But this time, someone small and fragile depended on him. The door slammed open 10 minutes later, snow blasting inside, followed by the sound of boots and shouting voices. 3 aliens in dirty armor barged in, weapons drawn, faces half covered with breathing masks. The 4th stayed near the door. Watching for movement outside, we picked up human power readings. One said in a raspy voice, "Must be hiding supplies here." Mason kept his weapon lowered. "Calm, just me in here," he said. "One soldier." Stuck with a broken comm, the lead raider stepped closer, eyes scanning the room. "No backup coming." "Nope," Mason replied. "You're wasting your time." But they didn't believe him. One of them moved toward the food shelf, the exact one hiding Nari. Mason's heart pounded in his ears. He had to act fast. He raised his weapon and fired a stun burst into the floor, shouting, "That's close enough." The room exploded with noise, weapons drawn, shouting. 2 blaster bolts flying past his head and striking the ceiling. Mason dropped low behind the table, returning fire, his aim sharp, focused. But there were too many angles, and then everything changed. The lights in the outpost went black. Emergency red backup kicked in, casting the room in blood-colored shadows. The raiders froze, unsure, just for a moment. That was when the alarms began to blare a deep, shrieking sound, and the floor trembled under their boots. The raiders looked around in confusion. What the hell? Mason knew that wasn't part of the system. He glanced at the food shelf and saw it just for a second, glowing wire pulled from the wall. And behind it, two tiny glowing eyes. Nari had hacked the power core, redirected the surge, and triggered. The lockdown, smoke, filled the vents, and metal shutters slammed down over the windows with a loud clang. Mason took the chance, rolled out, fired two perfect shots. One raider fell. The second dropped his weapon and ran. The third tried to retreat, but was kicked down by Mason's armored boot. The last one turned to run, and there she was. Nari stood between him and the door, holding a plasma cutter with both hands, trembling but not backing down. The raider hesitated. What is that thing? She's with me, Mason growled. The alien turned to run anyway, but was knocked out cold by Mason's final shot to the leg. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the hissing vents and flickering red lights. Nari dropped the cutter, her tiny arms shaking, her chest rising and falling with fast breaths. Mason rushed over, knelt down, and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded into his chest, her voice small. "I help. I help you." "You did more than help," he said softly. "You saved us both." In that moment, he didn't see her as an alien anymore. He saw her as a teammate, a brave, clever little fighter. And deep down, Nari knew something too. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't prey. Not anymore. The outpost smelled like burnt wires and victory. Mason sat on a bench near the supply table, his arm wrapped in a tight bandage, blood seeping through slowly. A medical drone hovered near his shoulder, beeping quietly as it administered a second dose of antiseptic foam. Across from him, Nari sat cross-legged on the floor, her blanket wrapped tightly around her like armor. She hadn't spoken much since the fight. Not because of fear, but because she was thinking. Her claws tapped the edge of the bench, her eyes locked on Mason's wound. "You bleed," she said softly. "I've done worse," he replied, wincing as the drone patched a deep cut across his ribs. "You were amazing back there, Nari. You didn't just help, you saved my life." She blinked slowly, her gaze drifting to the shattered door where the raiders had broken in. "I was scared." "Me too," Mason said with a crooked smile. "But brave doesn't mean not scared. It means doing it anyway." She seemed to think about that for a long time. Her small chest rose and fell with a deep breath. Then she asked, "Will more come?" "Maybe," Mason answered. "But we sent a beacon through the short-range channel before the fight started. Someone will hear it. Maybe Earth's command. Maybe another patrol ship. Help is coming." She nodded, her fingers now fiddling with the glowing orb toy she had finished building the day before the attack. It floated again, slowly spinning, changing colors from blue to soft green to a gentle pink. Then she looked up. "When they come, what happened to me?" she asked. Mason didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the endless snow, his jaw tight. He knew what would happen if the wrong people found her. Some bureaucrat would mark her as alien property, a research subject, or worse, a security risk, filed and forgotten. But not if he said no. Not if he made her something more than that. He looked her in the eyes and said, "They'll ask questions, but I'll tell them the truth, that you're under my protection. That you're not some thing we found in a wreck." Her fingers tightened around the orb. "Then I stay." Mason stood, wincing again from the burn on his side. He walked over and knelt down in front of her. "You're not just staying," he said. "You're coming with me, if you want to. No cages, no labs, no cold rooms with blinking lights. Just space, stars, learning, and maybe a place on Earth. If you'd like it." She blinked fast, her mouth opening slightly in surprise. "You mean Real sky?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Blue one." He smiled. "Yeah, real blue. With clouds that float like soft pillows, you'd love it." Her face lit up, and for the first time. Her smile didn't fade after a second. It stayed, an alert buzzed from the console. Bright and sharp, incoming ship, detected, signal matched Earth Alliance patrol frequency. Mason walked to the console and tapped the screen, confirming the identity. It was a rescue ship, armed, clean, with a proper transponder. They had picked up his beacon and were only minutes away from landing. Mason turned to Nari, who was now standing beside him, blanket dragging behind her like a warrior's cloak. "You ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath and nodded when the rescue team arrived. They entered with weapons raised, scanning the outpost for threats. But what they found instead was a wounded soldier standing tall beside a tiny alien girl, holding her hand gently as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. One of the officers raised a brow. "That yours?" Mason looked down at Nari and back up. "Yeah," he said. "She's with me." They didn't argue. The officer lowered his weapon and gave a slow nod. "Then we take you both." As the shuttle doors opened and the two stepped inside, Nari leaned against Mason's side, holding tight to his jacket, outside the window. Snow still danced across the dead moon, but it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't alone. She wasn't scared, and, most of all, she finally knew what the word meant. When she whispered it into his ear, "Safe," Mason smiled, eyes closed for just a moment. "Yeah, Nari," he said, "you're safe now."